Welcome to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement, a podcast where we dive into the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the law enforcement officer.
Minor injury accident to the 2700 block of 156th Avenue Northeast.
All right, welcome back to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. I'm your host, Vern Phillips, and today we are joined on the show with Tim Rutledge. So I'm just going to give it over to Tim. He's going to explain a little bit about himself, his just kind of his history in law enforcement, what he's doing now, and how he is, effectively changing the culture that we know. So, Tim, go ahead.
Hope I'm changing the culture, but I'm only the messenger. My career started January 3rd, 1980. I was a junior college campus policeman, sworn, bonded, and commissioned, given a gun at 18 years old. Spooky. I was grandfathered in by Mississippi's Post Act at 19, grandfather at 19. Then I joined the Bureau of Narcotics a couple of years later, retired from there in 2009. Then I went to work for a place called the RCTA. It's a DOD entity that trains law enforcement. There are 5 of these schools around the country. I was director of one of them. And then I retired, created my company to do peer support across the country. It has expanded significantly, and we're getting the message out of peer support that hasn't been to audiences that have not been reached. And I'm blessed to be a part of it. Absolutely.
Well, it sounds like you've got an extensive history in law enforcement, and then also now you're, kind of one of the ones leading the way as far as peer support goes. And, and I want to talk about that. That's primarily what we want to talk about in this episode. But I just want to talk a little bit about your career. And, as you look back over your career, what did you do for yourself to maintain just your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health throughout your career? We're talking 30 plus years. So
primarily it was based on faith. And, my religion got me through a lot of bad times. And then about 1991, we discovered peer support kind of accidentally. There were the critical incident stress management models out there, but we did that for a while, but we realized we were just sitting around waiting on something bad to happen. We weren't really taking care of each other. And so we created LEAPS, the Law Enforcement Alliance for Peer Support, and it means that we take care when an officer has a sick child in the hospital. We help that officer. We help them get the other children to school, or we help them financially if absolutely necessary. Now, if a cop goes out and buys a brand new 2024 Escalade, I'm not going to help him pay for it. But if a tornado hits his house, we're going to find payment mechanisms to help. Mm-hmm. And if they fall through financial insecurities through no fault of their own, we'll help them. And illnesses and death of parents and the host of life that happens, that all this, the host of other things that happen in life that are just devastating, that aren't directly related to the job. Peer support does that. CISM does not. And so it's an expansion, it's a progression, it's a graduation, if you will, from CISM. And CISM is important. It is an important part of peer support, but probably we deal with relationship issues more than any other issue, and we'll talk about that shortly. But if I went through the woes of being a law enforcement officer, like having a life expectancy of 59, being the highest rate of suicide there is, having a very high divorce rate, with high domestic abuse. I disagree with the national numbers on domestic abuse, but I know we have a high rate. Alcoholism twice at the national average, and then we add pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical dependence. And then as a cop, you're 73 times more likely to be assaulted with injury than the number 2 occupation we measure assaults in, taxi cab drivers. And we had 331 officers shot last year, and it does look like this year will be another record, unfortunately. We're online to have a record year of number of officers shot. Fortunately, the number of officers dying from gunfire is down from last year. I think that's because of vest and tactics and modern medicine. But we're getting shot in record numbers. It's a dangerous world out there.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely,
dangerous.
for sure.
And
And
all those reasons are why we created the real peer support mechanism about 2003, and we've been doing that since, and it's been great, been a blessing to be a part of.
yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure. So, as you kind of look back over, your career, what are kind of three of the most significant things that you've learned throughout your career,
Hmm. Well,
making you think now?
yeah, a little bit. Number one, I outgrew my ego eventually. I was the smartest guy in the world when I was 28 years old, and I learned eventually I wasn't so smart. And now, the more I learn, the less I know. And number two, it was fun to be a drug agent in the 80s and 90s. I mean, that's when drugs were still sexy. She's got bags under her eyes now, and she's got gray hair and wrinkles, but drugs are still the number one killer of all out there. I think vehicle
Mm.
accidents killed about 55,000. We had a more than 110,000 drug overdose deaths last year. So drugs are still the number one culprit of crime and death on the street. Uh, so unfortunately, we're not addressing the drug issue. But I had fun. It was just fun, and uh, I wanted to go to work every day. Actually, one of those type that never worked a day in my life. Still haven't. It's been fun. Yes, we had administrative woes. We had persecution from bad bosses. We had all that, but you learn to get through that. You learn to overlook that. And three, I would say I learned to put my family first eventually. I did the wiretaps for the Bureau of Narcotics. My son's first year of his life, I spent 155 nights away from him. I still keep a diary, a daily diary, and from September 18th, 1983, I can tell you where I was and who I was with and what I was doing. And when I looked at that diary at the end of the first year, 155 nights away from my infant son, I realized he was going to grow up without me. So I made those changes to spend time with family, and I absolutely do not regret that. Absolutely, one of the best decisions I've made. So that's three off the top of my head. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but
No, absolutely. I
uh,
mean, because those are the real tangible takeaways that maybe some people don't even want to talk about. But I think learning to putting your family first, I think that's one thing that a lot in law enforcement today and just first responder community in general don't really put a lot of stake in. There's always going to be more demand, and the thing is, the more things you volunteer for, the more things you put your hand involved in, the more that is going to be demanded of you, the more that your agency or department will take. And so, educating those that are in the law enforcement community right now who are still, they got their boots on the ground, that are looking for that next step, looking for that next promotion. A lot of times, the family dynamic falls second to the career. And I've made that myself too, where I've said, well, I've just got to do, this is just until I get to this point. But then you get to that point, and then it's like, well, I've got to do this, and I've got to work these hours just until I get to this point. Um, there's always going to be another point. There's always going to be another push. There's always going to be another reason why you have to be, putting in long hours. You have to be away from your family. But to be able to recognize it and step back, and for you, I think, documenting it out and then realizing, like, man, this is the amount of time I was away from my son in the first year of his life. If I continue to do this, I'm going to be an absent father. And I think that's what
or
we don't talk about. We don't really push that to
absolutely,
some of the newcomers. Like, hey, look, make sure that you are putting, that focus and that effort into your family, because when the career's gone, hopefully your family's still going to be the one that's there, and that's what
absolutely,
we want. So, but yeah, no, those are great.
absolutely.
Those are great takeaways. Those are great practical things that we
And,
need to start imparting in on the new generation coming in.
and of course, we didn't have cell phones back then. So now, even when you're with kids these days, you're buried in your cell phone. I'm gonna
Mm.
challenge these guys to put the freaking phone down. Enjoy your kids. I had a conversation yesterday with a cop, and you really only get about 8 Halloweens, and they don't do that anymore. That's it. And you only get 18 birthdays, and they're gone. And after About age of 16, when they start driving, you really never see them again. So enjoy your children, spend time with them, hold their hand, play with them, get engaged physically with them, playing ball and having a tea party and whatever, but engage with your children is my plea. You will not regret it. You'll be close to them all your life if you do.
Yeah, and that's just good practical advice, and I can sit here and agree with you on that because I try to implement things in my life, right, to where I'm making sure that I'm giving time to my family. But even with that, even with the current position I hold, there's always a phone call, there's always a text, there's always something, going on. Just recently, Tim, my wife Laurie, so she,
Yes.
we had a very, authentic conversation, and she made the comment to me that hey, you're home, but sometimes when you're home, you're on your phone and you're not home,
Yeah.
and and that was to me, that was real, right? That was a real moment where I was like, man. So she sees this. She sees the implication of how much that phone can become a part of who you are. But the phone is
Well,
not who you are. The phone is a tool. It's not
let me
you.
de let me defend you just a little bit, Vern. We cops, we get addicted to adrenaline. And I'm reading studies now about adrenaline therapy, treating PTSD and other trauma. But we get addicted to the adrenaline. And this phone is a link to that adrenaline at work. And so I'll defend you. It's hard to put the phone down. I mean, it's hard for the brain
Oh
to
yeah.
turn this thing off. So I'm begging the cops out there that might listen to this to make a conscious effort when you're on your couch or in your recliner looking at your phone and your kids are at home. I'm going to challenge you to put your phone down. Have a conscious thought. I shouldn't be doing this now until the kids go to bed. And then after the kids go to bed, you got to have a conversation with your partner, a real conversation, and we'll talk about how to do that shortly. But instead of asking how your day was, I love the statement. Name three good things that happened to you today. That requires process and dialogue. Name three bad things that happened to you today. That requires process and dialogue. And you can immediately get to bad things that happened that day with your partner and begin to address them or at least console them.
Hmm.
So, one of the
Yep.
things we teach in the family class.
Yep. And I don't. We could sit here and kind of go back and forth about some of this stuff. And never really get into the aspect of peer support. So,
Right. Sorry.
no, it's I'm the one kind of pushing the question. So, when we start looking at peer support and what you're doing and leaps. So you've already kind of explained just a little bit what leaps is and how it came about and the development of it. So right now, what is leaps doing, and kind of just what is the overview of what you guys are teaching law enforcement and peer support members how to effectively engage other peers?
We are now expanding. We began in Mississippi with one person, and now we have more than 3,000 Leaps members across the country. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico last week, and the message is simple that we're expanding. Take care of each other. And it's not, again, waiting for a critical incident to happen and doing a quick response and then maybe some follow up, and then that's it. It's real peer support about their life. Now, the job is a big part of the life. The job bonds us together. The job gives us credibility with peer support, but most of our issues aren't related to the job. In classes, we require the student answer this question: what is the worst thing you've been through in your life? And they answer that publicly. 90% of the answers to that question, what is the worst thing you've been through in your life, are not law enforcement stories. They're
Hmm.
Their stories, for example, 15 to 20% of the participants in our classes were sexually abused as children. And that that is why they're in law enforcement. It's a great motivation. This happened to me, so I'm going to address this as an adult and as a cop, and I'm going to do something about it. A lot of physical abuse, a lot of current domestic abuse that they're the victim or survivor of, if you will, particularly in female officers. And needs to be addressed. We're addressing that. Uh, and then the message of suicide and suicide recognition and prevention is something that we're touting in the classes and LEAPs across the country. Very few people have discussed this, and it is our number one killer. There's about a 2.5 times greater chance you'll kill yourself than that you will be killed by a bad guy. And we're just simply not really addressing that. What does a suicidal cop look like? And what do I do about it? We're not addressing that nationally. Several people are beginning to. Karen Solomon at Blue Help created that mechanism probably 10 years ago. It's beginning to come into the limelight, but it's still a taboo topic generally. And uh, and then we have cops that really aren't fit to be a cop. I mean, they really have uh, mental issues themselves. We teach how to recognize that in these classes, and and then of course line of duty deaths and grief in general. Another taboo topic. Uh, we don't talk about death. We're afraid to, and so we address that in the class. Uh, Officer involved shooting section covers the whole gambit of what trauma does to the body before, during, and after. And we take shootings as an example, but most officers won't be involved in a shooting. Still, although we're shooting more people than we ever have, there's still a good chance you'll never be in a shooting in your career, and I hope you're not. And then we go back to the family issue. We're not addressing that. We don't talk about things like sex. Instead, we let the television commercials and the internet teach us what sex is supposed to be, and it's obviously not what sex is supposed to be. We teach what sex should be in a relationship, and so those are things that LEAPs are doing across the country, and it's a big hit. A lot of teams have done what they call peer support, but inevitably it was just a critical incident response. Uh, it's not real peer support. Until you address the non-law enforcement issues, it's not peer support. So that's where LEAPS is. We've got a little more than 3,000 officers that we trained. And the idea of LEAPS is when you have an officer in Ocala, Florida, shoot a 17-year-old kid, we have a cop in Biloxi, Mississippi, and in Longview, Texas, that have been involved in shooting juveniles before. That's been trained in peer support, and we can link the two together via phone or via a video mechanism. And when the conversation is done, no one knows it ever happened. That's the idea of peer support. Uh,
Yeah, because the whole idea of peer support is founded on, you know, the confidentiality aspect of, you know, having those conversations, having those one-on-one conversations where people actually feel they have the ability to just share the struggles and the things they're dealing with and the things they're going through, you know, without the potential likelihood that it's going to end up, you know, on Facebook or end up on the desk of somebody else that doesn't need to know. So I've gone through your class. I've gone through your class twice now, and
Twice.
actually, well, I mean, I might almost say maybe 3 times.
You're right. Has been
So
3 times.
yeah. So I mean, you teach a lot of stuff. You teach a lot of really good practical things to law enforcement that, just like you said, that we don't talk about. Oftentimes, we don't really talk about the family dynamic and just what that looks like outside of the profession and how the profession, you know, puts the stress on that. But then, just the outside stress, just of having family in general and having relationships outside of the career. So when you kind of are teaching and you're implementing this, how do you go about, or how would you, somebody who's a peer support member, how would you encourage them to actively, you know, engage in somebody's life, not just in a response to a critical incident or after a critical incident? You know, maybe they're going through a hard time. Maybe their marriage is going through a rough spot, and you're aware of it, and other people are aware of it, but they haven't reached out and asked for help. You know, what would you say is the best practice for a peer support member to kind of step into that and maybe just offer some assistance?
That's actually the easy part. Once you've established a reputation that number one, you'll keep your mouth shut, that you're trustworthy, and that you actually care, the cops will come to you. They'll flock to you. And if they don't, if you hear their father or mother died, or they have a child in the hospital, you just go see them. Hey, how you doing? Sorry your child's sick. And if that child has a serious disease, we have cops on our team that have had children with serious diseases before, and we can put them together. But for that cop out there doing peer support, if they see your genuine compassion, they'll come to you. Uh, uh, the core of peer support should always be meeting a cop at 6 a.m. shift change or 2 a.m. behind a store while they're out on patrol, helping them significantly, talking to them, leaving, and no one knows the meeting ever happened. That should be the core of peer support. Uh, no recognition, no award, no statistic, no notes, no nothing. Just help the cop and move on. And we've learned an old Alcoholics Anonymous cliche: you're only as sick as your secrets. And when we talk to cops and get secrets out, we heal them, or actually they heal themselves. Uh, we're just the mechanism for that, but we're honored to be the mechanism. That's what peer support should be, just taking care of each other.
So it's establishing that credibility with them, that they know, hey, if I'm in a situation, I can come and talk to this individual. And it takes a while to create that. That's not something that just gets established overnight. It's something that they need to see through and through and through, over the course of, sometimes, months, maybe even years for some people, to really be able to create that trust, to feel like, hey, this is somebody I can talk to. And unfortunately, I mean, that's not with everybody.
That's right. And, it's the old cliche, you can lead a horse to water. There will be cops that that need help, and you'll go to them and they'll say, I'm good, I'm fine, I got this. But they're the same person that's going to call you at 2 o'clock in the morning 2 years from now when they have a gun to their head. So you plant the seeds, they will come. I promise you that.
And when we start talking about peer support and, interacting with somebody else, how common is it for, a peer support provider, a peer support team member, to interact with another peer on one or two occasions, and then maybe not have any more interaction because now the crisis in that peer's life has been averted, or they feel like they're moving on. How often do you think that takes place, where it's just maybe one or two, and then they kind of fade off? Once the crisis is averted, we're back to normal.
That's actually very common. And, cops just want to be well enough to get the job done. Uh, and once we get them to that point, they're good. They'll call next time, or we'll see them next time. I wish there was a way to get the message that if we really are here for everyone and everything, they will see that eventually, maybe. But we've been around since 2003 in Mississippi, and we still have officers out there that have never even heard of us before. So I think if I were really concerned about marketing, I would be doing something different. But it's not about me. I've learned that it's about the cops out there. So if we keep focused on them, I think we'll be fine. And I think peer support teams generally get well, they begin to base their program on their own ego. And I've seen those programs come and go across the country. One person wants to control it. One person wants to dictate who and who does not go, and when they go and when they don't go to take care of a cop. We've learned self-deployment is the answer. If you hear something bad happening, go. Hear an officer needs help, go. And most of the time, I don't even hear about it. That's head of the team in Mississippi. And that's what I want. I just want cops to be better.
Yeah, and I think the culture. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, well, I'm just wondering if we were to ask your audience what is their number one issue in life. Some would say the job, but I'm thinking I'm going back to the family relationship thing. Most of that is on relationships.
Yeah.
And the critical incident stress management doesn't really address relationships at all. And those relationships, the number one reason we die from suicide is relationship issues. So they go hand in hand, actually. So I think your officers out there listening to this will acknowledge that they've never had a family class. They've never had anyone come in and say, this is how you land your family, this is how you're different as a law enforcement officer, and this is what you do about it. And a host of people could do that training for them, a host of them. The fundamentals are the fundamentals. When a Major League Baseball player practices baseball, he puts his ball on a tee like we did when we were 6 years old, and he practices his grip on the bat, his weight shift, the swing, the follow through. He practices that on a tee because the fundamentals are the fundamentals. And there are a host of people out there that could teach the fundamentals of a relationship. And some of them are even have significant law enforcement experience. So find them and make that happen. I'm begging your audience out there to focus on family and relationships.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of law enforcement, and you've touched on this, they are really good at doing their job and interacting with people in the community, and they have no issue, being the first on scene, the first one through the door, the first one putting themselves in harm's way to, address whatever the threat is in front of them, or, to kind of be that mediator between, maybe there's a domestic, but they go home and they have no real practical skills or instruction on how to effectively interact with their own family. And they're more than willing to jump in and help somebody else on the outside throughout their career. But when it comes to their own home, their own life, their own family, they just oftentimes they don't do anything, right? And
absolutely.
And eventually, what happens is you see that end in maybe some type of domestic, where then that causes the officer to get himself hemmed up and in trouble, and maybe there's a separation from the job, or ends up in divorce, or ends up in just nasty custody battles, and just he said she said things, and
absolutely. And what we do on the street does not work at home. An officer gets to family disturbance, he'll point his finger, say, shut up. One more word, you're going to jail. We can even threaten to arrest people in a domestic to get people to talk to us. That does not work at home. And again, if an officer has no training in what to do at home, he's going to revert back to his training or her training, what they know on the street. And that gets us in trouble and causes serious relationship issues, obviously. So a little bit of training will go a long way. It will.
Yep. We're working on something here for after the first part of the year, we're going to be doing a marriage marriage conference, marriage summit. We're probably done in 2 nights. We'll do so that we can hit both companies, but just kind of a practical way to address some of these issues, right? Some of these things that we have going on. So, we're looking at doing just hey, this is the law enforcement career. This is what it looks like. These are the things that your significant other interacts with each and every day. Because a lot of times the family, and especially the significant other, they don't really have a whole grasp on what their law enforcement officer does, right? Day in and day out, some of the things that they deal with. So kind of giving them just this general overview, but then also giving them tangible ways. Hey, look, this is how you guys can effectively communicate. These are some good ideas. And then, we're going to go into a panel of individuals that, have worked in law enforcement, that are married and even have been divorced and since remarried, that can actually talk and say, hey, look, this is what we've done that works. This is what does not work. Just to kind of give them that actual tangible look. It can be done. You just have to put the time and the effort into it. And, it's hard, right?
It is
this,
hard.
I know this, that marriage is not easy. It's not, as soon as you get married, it's not like this automatic, pass go where everything's going to be smooth from there. A lot
Far
of
from
times
it, right?
a lot of times, there's issues going into the marriage, and a lot of times people think in their mind that, well, once we're married, this will just go away. No, generally, if there's things that are happening going into the marriage, they're just going to be exacerbated once you do get married. So make sure that you're putting in the work. Make sure you're addressing the things that are going on. Make sure you're having those communications, and learn good, effective ways to communicate. And you talk about that in your course. You talk about that in your training, and that's one of the blocks that you do utilize and you do have in there. But I think that some people don't understand, or they have a hard time actually, knowing when to step into somebody's life. And
Right.
so as a peer support team member, if you're a peer support team member, what are some of the tips that you would give for, just kind of stepping into somebody's life when you're really unsure of, okay, not sure if they want me. I mean, because it's kind of like me interjecting myself, but if they see something, if they know something, and maybe maybe they're a newer deputy, or maybe they don't know this individual very well. What would your suggestions be on that?
Well, number one, humility is key, and understand not everybody likes you. And it's hard for me to understand. Somebody might
Uh,
not like me, but you can offer and very privately whisper with a low tone, let me help you through this. I can meet you anywhere, day or night. Plant that seed and let them leave it on them. You can't force yourself on anyone. And chaplains, I've seen chaplains trying to push themselves and push themselves and push themselves. And every time they push, those cops are going to retreat even further. Uh,
yep.
plant the seed, let it grow. They will come. If you build it, they will come, of course, and they will come eventually. And I'm guessing I may get some phone calls. I'll give my number out. I may get some phone calls from this podcast. If I can help a cop anywhere that might be listening to this, I am 24/7 for you about any issue you want to talk about. Now, I don't like talking to drunk cops at midnight, when, but uh, but I will. If you have a real issue, I'll absolutely help you in the way I can. And I know Vern has the same attitude for anybody listening to this. Vern is 24/7 for you. Please call one of us. We'll help you significantly. I promise you. And we'll show you how to help yourself significantly. Um,
And if you
um,
want to, Tim, I can add the information for Leaps in the show notes. And if you want me to put
yeah,
your
yeah,
number in there, I can do that.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and that's the
And
thing
again,
is,
go ahead.
yeah,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I keep cutting you off, but they're hearing my
Hey,
voice, and for whatever reason they don't like me. You can text me, and I'll put you in touch with a cop that you will like. We'll find one. Out of the 3,000 we have in 17, 18 states, there's got to be somebody that can help you. And no one will ever, not even me, unless you talk to me, no one will ever know. No one outside of the two of you will ever know. That's just how it should be.
yep. And I'll put that in there, and that's important. Is just people knowing that there is somebody there that you can always reach out to, you can always call. And some people make use of that, and some people don't. I mean, even in my position, and Tim, I think we've talked about this before. Offline is, you know, even where I'm at, there's times where people just want to struggle. They don't,
Yeah,
they don't want any outside, anybody kind of stepping in and helping them, and you can only do so much. You can only offer so much, and at some point you kind of got to step back and give them that space, but don't allow it to become something where you're like, well, you know what, fine, screw you. You don't want my help, whatever, I'm done.
right.
Because that's not the point, right? The point is,
Well,
you're there because you want to help somebody else, and if they're not
right,
there, if they're not to that point, then they just step back, and they might get to that point, and then they might reach out. But if it goes right into the attitude, it was like, hey, I was here to help you, and you didn't want my help, so whatever, kick rocks.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Yeah,
that's not the attitude, right? That's not the peer support model
uh,
that you're pushing,
absolutely
or
not.
that
Right.
that you even want. So you want people
And
that are
we
going to be available. Go ahead, Tim.
absolutely, well, and we understand that a lot of cops were sexually, physically, emotionally abused as children, and the pain is all they know. They think this
Hmm.
is what life is. And they don't know that there's a better life when you get this stuff out of your head, out of your heart, when you share secrets with someone. They don't know how much better you can be and how much better life can be. So hopefully we'll get the opportunity to expose a little bit of that to someone and they'll want more. And who knows, they'll join the peer support and pass it on to other cops in the future. I cannot forget dispatchers. Often they are more traumatized than we are, especially when a cop is hurt. Often they're much more traumatized than we are. So please know that if you're a dispatcher out there listening to this, communications officer, excuse me, uh, we're available to you too, and we have several hundred communication officers that are available. I can put you together with uh, communication officers from Charlotte to Texas to Albuquerque to everywhere in between, and we can uh, we can get you some help, and no one will ever know.
That's great. And what I'll do is,
Oh,
um, yep, go ahead.
well, I just got to add this too. There is no fee or money involved in any way whatsoever with any of this. I'm not in it. We're not in this for the money. I don't know anybody doing peer support for money. It wouldn't last very long.
Yeah.
But we are in this just for the soul of the officer and
Yeah.
the dispatcher. That's why we're in this.
So I want to just give you an opportunity, just so if somebody wants to research leaps and research kind of what that looks like, and just tell them kind of where they can find that, and I'll put all this in the show notes also. But and then also maybe some of the upcoming trainings that you do have, and kind of where you're going to be throughout the rest of this year, maybe into the first part of next year.
Well, I will be in Atlanta for a couple of weeks for the Atlanta Police Department. They're requiring every sergeant and up, including Chief Darren Shearbaum, to attend this class, and he has attended the class. It's changed the culture of the Atlanta Police Department. I will be in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, doing an advanced and a train the trainer in February. Uh, in between, I have about 4 or 5 classes. Uh, Two in Mississippi here. I have officer involved shootings classes in North and South Carolina. We have the Police Benevolent Association, the Southern States PBA. We're doing 1 day suicide and PTSD seminars across the Southeast. You can go to PBA website for that. Our website is msleaps.org. The Alabama's website is alleaps.org, Louisiana, laleaps.org, and you can find information about classes and individual peer support there. We're still waiting on someone to create like FL Leaps, Vern, in all your spare time,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we are simply an
I got a lot of
alliance.
spare time.
Well, yeah, I can tell. But we are not looking to take over any team. We're just looking to create this alliance so cops can get help. And if you have an existing team and want to join up with us, absolutely, you're welcome. And because we'd love to have your bodies too. You've got cops that have been through stuff that we haven't been through. So the alliance is just that. We want to join up and make this thing bigger and broader so cops can get help.
Absolutely. So, and before we close, I want to say that thank you for being on here, being a part, and for really pushing this change to be available to not just in a critical incident, but just for everyday struggles that law enforcement officers face, that those who even first responders have faced, because you have had some firefighters come through your class, and
Right.
even with the ones that we've done, they've come back twice. So um,
I'm sorry, Vern. I thought you said first responders and firefighters in the same sentence. I'm sorry. I can't
it
hear. My connection must be bad. I'm
must have been a
kidding,
little
of course.
fuzzy.
Yeah, I love firefighters.
Yeah.
I do.
But before we go, so to where you're at now, how much is your faith and your relationship with God played into that? Played into where you're at now and what you're doing.
100%. He guides it now. I don't advertise it that way, but God guides this whole program. He guides my daily life 100%. And when I do well, it's God. When I do poorly, it's Tim. And it took me a long time to learn that.
Yep.
I'm an expert in telling you how not to do peer support because I've screwed it up when I got it right. But I've learned to let go and let God. And when that happens, life is really good.
So good. Well, Tim, I appreciate you taking the time and jump on here. So hopefully, through this, that there's others that, have heard what you've been saying and will look up what Leaps is doing, and they'll just start, making a change where they're at. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your ministry. Thank you for your passion. By the way, everybody, Vern shares my passion. Is probably more passionate about cops than I am. So reach out to him. He is the real deal. I wouldn't be. This is the first podcast I've done ever outside of a little local thing for one agency. Uh, you can trust Vern. He's genuine. So reach out to him.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, Tim.
All right, brother.
All right, we'll see you.
I appreciate you tuning in and listening to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and share this resource with your fellow officers. The goal of Critical Aspects is to serve, support, and sustain the law enforcement professionals. So head over to www.criticalaspects.org for more resources and information. And as always, God bless and be safe.